Games focusing on Wario always have this creative edge to them that a lot of other series, especially ones that are running as long as his, tend to lack. Something about the offbeat nature of the games always stand out from the crowd, whether it be his puzzle games, his minigame games, or his platformers. But even compared to other Wario titles, Wario Land 4 stands out from the crowd. An example that experimentative game design doesn't have to be messy, that iterative game design doesn't have to be repetitive, and that following the footsteps of multiple series before you doesn't have to feel like you're being a copycat game. Wario Land 4 follows Wario as he's read up about the latest pyramid scheme. Eager to join in on it, he races off to find the golden pyramid hidden deep in a jungle. Chasing Tail as soon as he gets there, he falls down a pit and finds himself trapped inside the pyramid. From here, you do a short tutorial setting up the pace of the game before it really opens itself up to you. So let's talk about the game's mechanics in the most conventional and straightforward sense that they're ever going to be used, as the tutorial does a good job of showing us what the future objectives are before setting us free into the rest of the game. Every stage is a portal leading to another world. Upon entering the stage, the portal shuts behind you. Instead of just needing to make it to the end of the level, you have to collect 4 gem pieces scattered around the stage in big golden boxes that you have to bash open, as well as a special key. When you have these items, you can leave the stage, which you do by pressing the frog switch. After activating it, special frog blocks either appear or disappear throughout the level, opening and closing off segments of the stage, while the timer pushes you to leave the stage as quickly as you can. Leaving is generally easy though, as you need to make your way back from whence you came.
Go whence I came.
Upon leaving, your 4 gem pieces are put together to make one big gem, and your key unlocks the door to the next stage. The gem then slots itself into the boss door, which in the tutorial section immediately allows you to access the boss fight. So let's talk controls for a second. Wario can walk, run into enemies to damage them, run headfirst through special colored blocks with his momentum, which powers up over distance. He can also pick up and throw items and enemies. And while you can jump on enemies, this usually does not kill them. You can roll around as a ball to slide through small cracks. There's a ground pound, which, just like running, has a regular and super form depending on how long you've been pounding for. It's a bit more mechanically involved than most 2D Mario games, while still being less focused on player skill and more on figuring out when to do these things, as Mario titles are more a test of reflexes and skill, while Wario's titles lean more towards being puzzle platformers. Something that is interesting to note, since Wario's first outing in a solo game wasn't like this at all. Wario Land Super Mario Land 3 played mostly the same as Super Mario Land 2, the 6 golden coins, but with one major change. Wario is a clunky, heavier character than Mario, so instead of relying on jumping on enemies, the game has you running into them. Otherwise, you still had your linear stage progression with the same focus on power-ups and stage design as Super Mario Land 2, but it wasn't until Wario Land 2 that the series started to become more puzzle-intensive, even going so far as to remove the health bar to make solutions to the stage obstacles a bigger focus than health. Something that tied into the focus of Wario having different forms he'd change into, like Kirby, but in a more cartoony and oafish way. The main reason that this is so interesting is because Super Mario Land 2 was Wario's first appearance in a game. Now, most franchises would immediately make the character basically the same as the original, kind of the way that the first Wario Land did. But after a while, they started building him into a different type of character to do different things with, which made the character a lot more creatively involved. After you beat the first boss, who is a pushover and can pretty much be bullied around, the pyramid opens up, revealing a golden pyramid inside the pyramid, as well as 4 themed worlds, which you can progress through in any order you like, much like Super Mario Land 2. Wario Land 4 is divided in multiple worlds: Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, Pikachu Edition, and Anxiety. Now, while you can play these in any order, there is some variance between how difficult the stages in each world are, though if a world is proving too much early on, you can just leave, start another one, and come back later. While there's no checkpoints within stages themselves due to how they're designed, you're not locked into a world once you start progressing in it. If you can make it to the end of a stage and you forget a gem piece or a key, you keep the things that you've already collected and you can go back into the stage to search for what you're missing. Missing a key blocks off immediate progress, as you can't enter the next stage in a world without it. While missing a gem piece means you can still go to the next stage, but you're not allowed to fight the boss before getting all the gem pieces in the world before it. Boss fights are interesting because while they're not too challenging, they are a race against the clock. They have lots of health and long extended animations, and a risk-reward setup to dealing multiple blows in rapid succession or going for a reset. A good example to this would be the plant boss in the Emerald Passage. As he makes his way to you, you can stomp on his head from one of the ladders. Each time you do so, he moves closer to the top of the screen, making it harder to get successive hits in. However, if you touch the drool coming out of his mouth, you turn into a zombie, which in turn makes him fly up to the top of the screen, mocking your zombified state. Touching the firefly that shows up during this turns you back to normal and resets the boss's attack pattern from the start. Going for the reset wastes a lot of time, but it makes it easier to hit the boss again. If you take too long during a boss fight, the treasure chests in the background start disappearing, which plays into the game's ending. There are ways to shorten the boss fights, like using the money you earned during the stages to buy power-ups before going into the fight. A concept taken over from Super Mario Land 2. There's 3 minigames to play, and they're sorted by how long it takes before they give out coins based on how well you perform. The slower games are safer, the faster games are more risky. The first game is a baseball minigame where you have to hit home runs. 3 strikes, you're out. I remember liking this on the original hardware because you have to rotate your system to play this, but this is a lot harder to do on an emulator, so I didn't get too far into it recording for this video. The second game has you jump over obstacles to the rhythm of a song. Upon each loop, the speed increases. The third minigame has you matching weird faces by pressing the button at the right time. These games are all controlled simply by pressing the A button at just the right time, but their presentation and gameplay speed is so drastically different, it doesn't even feel like their inputs are all that similar while playing them. My favorite of the bunch is the obstacle course rhythm game. It's worth noting that a lot of these minigames found their way into the major Wario game released after this, WarioWare, which also featured the return of the long-form song-based rhythm game centered around jumping on repeat. In fact, these minigames kind of formed the basis of what WarioWare would become. Where Wario Land really shines though, is in the design of the main stages. In most platformers like this, splitting the worlds off into different themes means you're going to see the same basic tile sets and sprites across the stages within the worlds. Like an ice world where every stage is an ice stage, with slippery floors, a water world where every level is either underwater or has a lot of water surfaces on it, increasing the amount of obstacles as you learn to deal with the game's mechanics. Wario Land 4 gives every world a distinct look of its own, with each theme within a stage leading back to the central theme of the world. Ruby Passage is the game's technology world, featuring an industrial zone, a trash heap, a freezer, and a pinball stage. Meanwhile, Topaz Passage features a block fort, a board game, Nintendo Labo, and a domino stage. These are all the typical settings that you would expect to find inside an ancient hidden pyramid. What the tutorial never teaches you until you get out there and find out for yourself is that the objectives aren't always in the traditional order that you would expect. A lot of the time, you don't even have access to the key or gem pieces until after pressing the frog switch. And after a while, gem pieces don't get handed out in the clockwise display order anymore, which starts representing how close they are to the portal, not how far into the stage you are. While it still means that progressing through a stage is a linear experience, it does feel like the progression isn't following the stage's linearity, with a design structure typical of a platforming game, but a path that goes in multiple directions and even splits off based on what direction you're coming from. Because of this, it's often quite easy to miss a piece you need and come back to it later, which lends itself to this feeling of shared experimentation. Wario Land 4 is experimenting with its stage design, breaking away from normal linear platforming conventions, while you're experimenting with this design to find out what the intended path is, and what is going to lead to bonuses along the way. It comes to this point where you'll hit the frog switch completely sure that the gem piece you saw earlier in the stage and expected to find your way towards on your way back was actually accessible from the start all along, and the way back doesn't allow you to get past it again. In a lot of games, this would feel frustrating and unfair, but Wario Land 4 strikes a good balance by not removing your progress in these situations. All you need to get from the stage upon going back to it is that one gem piece that you missed out on. There's no lives, so dying doesn't lead to a game over, and for most of the game, having been allowed to walk past it at your own pace before turning the frog switch on means you know exactly how long you have before reaching the exit. Not that the game doesn't give you an incredibly safe amount of time to make your way back. For the most part, it's making you feel pressured to return rather than really forcing you to rush back. Due to the offbeat and experimental tone of the game, it's not surprising that this is the game that inspired the WarioWare series afterwards. Speaking of offbeat and experimentational, there's audio CDs hidden in each stage. In most games, this would lead to unlocking the soundtrack to listen to in a sound room. While Wario 4 does feature a sound room, the things featured there are, well, they're something, alright? The final stage is the kind of stage that a game like Wario Land 4 should end on. Immediately upon entering it, you land on the frog switch, urging you to make your way through the stage on a timer, while still making you collect gems to open the boss door. It's a great note to end the game on, with the final boss putting all the treasures from the previous bosses at stake. There's multiple endings to this game, and the ending is decided by how many treasures you have left by the end of this fight. If that feels rough, having your chances of an ending decided by how well you did in boss fights, it's not as bad as it sounds. Immediately after you beat the game allows you to reload your clear file with all the boss fights unlocked again. Using items on the bosses to reduce their health at the start of it makes it fairly easy to force it to an end before the treasures start disappearing again. And by the end of the game, getting the money to play the minigames shouldn't be too hard. You always have another shot at the perfect ending on your save file if you fuck it up. That said, if you didn't screw it up, or you don't care about getting the perfect ending, the game features 3 difficulty settings that change the enemy locations and the item placements, giving it much more replayability than you'd initially expect from the game. Wario Land 4 is a game that I feel everyone should have experienced at least once. I feel that way about most of Wario's titles, but 4 is the standout game for me due to the unique structure and amount of care put into the design of it. To this day, it's very much a game worth trying out if you haven't yet. Anyway, this was AboveUp. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will, see ya.